The longest plane hijacking in history. El Al Flight 426, 1968. How three terrorists changed aviation security forever. On July 23, 1968, El Al Flight 426 took off from Rome bound for Tel Aviv, carrying 38 passengers and 10 crew on a Boeing 707. Minutes after takeoff, three armed members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP, stormed the cockpit, assaulted the crew, and forced the plane to divert to Algiers, Algeria. What followed was a 40-day international hostage crisis, the longest hijacking in commercial aviation history. Non-Israeli passengers were released early, but Israeli hostages and crew endured weeks of fear, political games, and uncertainty while the world watched. This event marked the dawn of modern airline terrorism and forced Israel to completely overhaul its aviation security, creating protocols that influenced global standards still used today. In this detailed, documentary-style narration, we explore the full minute-by-minute story. The takeover at 33,000 feet. Life inside the Algerian airport standoff. Secret diplomatic negotiations, personal stories of bravery and terror, and the dramatic resolution. From cockpit drama to emotional reunions, this is a powerful true tale of resilience against political violence. Perfect for fans of aviation history, true crime documentaries, and untold stories from the 20th century. If you love content like History Channel or National Geographic specials, this is for you. Like if strong security against terrorism matters. Subscribe for more gripping historical documentaries and turn on notifications. Share with friends who appreciate deep, well-researched stories. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into one of the most important and terrifying stories in aviation history. A story that started as an ordinary flight home, but turned into a 40-day nightmare that changed how the entire world thinks about flying safely. This is the full, uncut account of El Al Flight 426. Picture yourself in the summer of 1968. The world is still recovering from the shocks of the Six-Day War. Tensions in the Middle East are sky high. In Europe, people are enjoying the optimism of the late 1960s, music, fashion, space race excitement. But for some radical groups, the skies were becoming a new battlefield. El Al Flight 426 was a Boeing 707-458, tail number 4, XATA. It had started its journey earlier that day from London's Heathrow Airport, stopped in Rome's Fiumicino Airport to pick up more passengers, and was now climbing smoothly into the Italian sky, heading east toward Tel Aviv's Lod Airport, which we now call Ben Gurion. On board, 38 passengers and 10 crew members. Many of the passengers were Israelis heading home after vacations or business trips in Europe. Families, young professionals, students, ordinary people with ordinary dreams. The crew was experienced and proud to fly for Israel's national airline. In the cockpit sat Captain Oded Abarbanel, a seasoned pilot with thousands of hours in the 707. Next to him was First Officer Maoz Poraz, and Flight Engineer Yona Lichtman monitored the systems. The mood was relaxed. The seatbelt sign had just gone off. Passengers were chatting, reading newspapers, or looking out at the sparkling sea below. A stewardess named Shoshana prepared coffee for the flight deck. Little did anyone know this simple act would trigger one of history's most significant hijackings. The moment everything changed. About 20 minutes after leaving Rome, as the aircraft reached cruising altitude around 33,000 feet, two men forced their way into the cockpit behind the stewardess. One raised a pistol and slammed the butt hard into First Officer Porraz's head. Blood started flowing. The other fired a single warning shot into the ceiling. The loud bang echoed through the plane. "Fly to Algiers! Change course now!" they shouted in English with heavy accents. "Do it or we kill everyone!" A third hijacker remained in the passenger cabin. He stood tall, waving a pistol in one hand and an unpinned hand grenade in the other. "Nobody move! This plane is now under the control of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Anyone who tries anything will die." Screams filled the cabin. Mothers pulled children close. People froze in their seats. A few men instinctively started to rise but saw the grenade pin missing and sat back down. The fear was immediate and paralyzing. Captain Abarbanel kept his cool under gunpoint. He knew any sudden move could end hundreds of lives. The hijackers claimed they had explosives planted throughout the aircraft. Whether true or bluff, the threat worked. The Boeing 707 banked sharply southwest, away from its planned route to Israel, now heading across the Mediterranean toward North Africa. For the next 2.5 hours, the passengers lived in terror. The cabin crew moved carefully, trying to calm people with quiet words and water. Some passengers whispered prayers in Hebrew. Others tried to comfort complete strangers. One young woman later recalled clutching her seat so hard her knuckles turned white the entire flight. The pilots had no real choice. Guns were pointed at their heads. They communicated calmly with air traffic control, trying to hint at the emergency without alerting the hijackers too obviously. But the message was clear. This was a hijacking. Arrival in Algiers. The plane finally touched down at Dar el Beida Airport in Algiers, today's Algiers International Airport, late on July 23, 1968. Algerian authorities quickly surrounded the aircraft with military vehicles. But instead of rescuing the hostages immediately, they appeared to sympathize with the hijackers' political cause. Algeria was a relatively new independent nation with revolutionary credentials and support for various anti-colonial movements. The hijackers announced their demands: the release of 16 Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails. They wanted global attention for their cause, and they got it. What happened next shocked the world. Algerian officials boarded the plane and ordered all passengers to separate by nationality. Non-Israelis, mostly Europeans and other foreigners, were allowed off relatively quickly. Within 24 hours, 23 non-Israeli passengers were released and flown to safety on Air Algerie planes. For the Jewish and Israeli passengers still on board, this separation brought back haunting memories. Just over 2 decades after the Holocaust, being singled out because of their identity felt deeply traumatic. It was a psychological blow on top of the physical danger. Over the following days, more releases happened in stages. 10 women and children were freed in what the Algerians called a humanitarian gesture. But the core group, 12 Israeli male passengers and the full crew of 10, remained hostages for the long haul. Life in captivity, the human stories. The hostages were moved into guarded quarters at the airport. Conditions were not the worst possible. They had beds, food, and basic medical care, but the uncertainty and constant armed guards created immense stress. Days turned into weeks. The 40-day ordeal tested every person differently. Captain Oded Abarbanel later wrote about his experiences. He described trying to maintain authority and morale among the crew and passengers. He would quietly encourage people to stay strong, share stories of home, and believe that negotiations were happening. The crew continued acting like crew even in captivity, bringing water, helping with small comforts, and modeling calm behavior. One passenger, a businessman named David, kept a secret mental journal. He later shared how he focused on small routines, counting steps in his room, remembering family recipes, anything to keep his mind from spiraling. Another young man, recently out of the army, thought constantly about escape but realized any attempt would endanger everyone. The women who had been released earlier spoke of their guilt for leaving husbands and friends behind. Families back in Israel waited anxiously by phones and radios. The Israeli government faced an impossible dilemma: negotiate with terrorists or risk the lives of citizens. Prime Minister Levi Eshkol's administration worked tirelessly through back channels. International pressure mounted. The United Nations got involved. Italy, where the flight originated, pushed hard. The International Federation of Airline Pilots Associations threatened to boycott flights to Algeria. Even the United States applied quiet diplomatic pressure. American viewers watching evening news broadcasts saw this as another sign of a dangerous new world of political terrorism. For the hostages, rumors were both hope and torture. Every time a negotiation seemed close, it would fall apart. Sleep became difficult. Some suffered from anxiety attacks. Others formed quiet bonds of friendship that would last lifetimes. The hijackers themselves stayed somewhat in the background after the initial takeover, letting Algerian authorities manage the standoff. But their message was clear. This was political theater, and the hostages were the unwilling actors. The long negotiations. Behind the scenes, intense diplomacy unfolded. Israel refused to publicly bow to terrorists, but quietly explored options. Algeria wanted to support the Palestinian cause without becoming a complete international pariah. They even claimed ownership of the Boeing 707 itself, calling it an instrument of war, a unique demand that complicated everything further. As weeks passed, the Algerians began softening. More small releases happened, but the final group waited until the very end. Finally, after exactly 40 days, a deal was reached. Israel agreed to release 16 Palestinian prisoners. On September 1, 1968, the remaining hostages and the aircraft were freed. They flew first to Rome, then home to emotional scenes in Tel Aviv. Families embraced. The nation celebrated their return. No one had been killed, a rare miracle in such a high-stakes situation. The security revolution that followed. This single hijacking changed aviation forever, especially for Israel. El Al and Israeli airports implemented revolutionary new measures. Deep passenger profiling and personal interviews. Armed undercover sky marshals on nearly every flight. Much stricter baggage and cargo screening. Better coordination with intelligence agencies. Early versions of reinforced cockpit doors and protocols. These changes made El Al one of the safest airlines in the world. Many of these ideas later influenced global standards, particularly after the horrors of September 11, 2001. Between 1968 and 1979, there were 11 more attempts to hijack Israeli planes. Every single one failed thanks to the new security mindset. The PFLP had hoped to strike a blow, but instead they awakened a determination that made future attacks far harder. Deeper personal reflections. Let's take a moment to humanize this further. Think about the children who were released earlier. One little girl later said she remembered the fear in her father's eyes as he hugged her goodbye, not knowing if he would see her again. Years later, reunited families spoke of nightmares that lingered for decades. Captain Abarbanel's leadership was praised widely. He refused to let despair take over. In his memoir, he described the split-second calculations pilots must make, balancing obedience for safety while looking for any safe window to resist. The crew's quiet professionalism stood out. Even under guard, they tried to keep dignity and normalcy. One flight attendant later said, "We were scared, but we were still El Al crew." That meant something. These were not superheroes or action movie characters. They were teachers, engineers, parents, pilots, regular people thrust into history. Their endurance reminds us of the incredible strength humans can find when facing evil. Why this story resonates with American viewers today. For those of us watching in the United States, this event feels connected to our own history. The 1960s and 70s saw a wave of hijackings, many involving flights to Cuba. But El Al Flight 426 was different. It was explicitly political, using civilians as bargaining chips on the world stage. It previewed the kind of ideological terrorism that would define later decades, including 9/11. The lessons remain powerful. Vigilance matters. Intelligent sharing matters. Strong, proactive security saves lives. When governments show weakness, terrorists gain confidence. When they show resolve, threats can be contained. In our current world of advanced scanners, behavioral detection, and international cooperation, it's easy to complain about airport lines. But stories like Flight 426 remind us why those inconveniences exist. They were born from real blood, sweat, and tears. Closing thoughts. The hijacking of El Al Flight 426 stands as a pivotal chapter, a story of terror, courage, painful choices, and ultimate transformation. It showed that a handful of determined people with guns and ideology could shake nations. But it also proved that resilience, smart policy, and international pressure can prevail. Ordinary passengers and crew became unwilling heroes. Their ordeal helped forge modern aviation safety. Next time you board a plane and go through security, remember the roots trace back to that hot July day in 1968. If you found this deep dive valuable, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with anyone who loves real history, aviation stories, or powerful survival tales. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss future episodes. We have many more forgotten stories from the past coming soon. Good luck on your own journey through history. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next video. Be sure to stick around on this channel. Hit subscribe right now for more incredible, well-researched content just like this. At the end, subscribe button animation, related video suggestions,